Imagine for a second that you're a soldier in 1966. You're stationed at one of the biggest, toughest military bases in the world. You've got tanks, helicopters, and thousands of your buddies all around you. You feel safe. But every single night, men in your unit are disappearing or getting attacked inside the base. There are no holes in the fence, no footprints in the mud, and no sign of the enemy. It's like fighting a ghost. What you don't know, and what won't be discovered for a long time, is that right under your bunk, there's an entire army living in a massive underground city. And they aren't just hiding, they are waiting for you to fall asleep. In 1966, the U.S. Army set up a massive home base in a place called Cu Chi, about 30 kilometers away from Saigon. They built this place to be a fortress. It had everything: heavy artillery, floodlights that stayed on all night, and watchtowers with soldiers staring into the jungle 24/7. On paper, it was impossible to get into, but the reality was a nightmare. Every night, like clockwork, something would happen. An explosion would go off near the mess hall, or a sudden burst of gunfire would ring out from the middle of the camp. By the time the guards ran to the spot, there was nothing there. No one was running away, no bodies were left behind, just a few dead or wounded Americans, and a silence that felt heavy. This went on for months. The commanders were losing their minds. They'd send patrols into the jungle every single day, hacking through the brush and looking for camps or supply lines, but they found absolutely nothing. It was like the enemy didn't exist during the day. Then, one day, a lucky patrol found something strange. It was just a tiny hole hidden under a pile of leaves right near the edge of the base. It looked too small for a person to fit through. One of the engineers got down on his knees, clicked on his flashlight, and peeked inside. The tunnel went straight down, then took a sharp turn into the pitch black. That was the moment everything changed. But even then, they had no idea how big this really was. Beneath that base, and stretching out for miles in every direction, was a network of tunnels 250 kilometers long. This wasn't just a hiding spot, it was a weapon. And over the next 9 years, those tunnels would cause more trouble for the U.S. military than almost any other battle in the entire war. So how does a group of people with no machines, no big construction equipment, and almost no money build an entire underground city right under the feet of the most powerful military on the planet? To understand that, we have to go back to the beginning. These tunnels didn't just appear overnight. They actually started way back in the 1940s when the Vietnamese were fighting the French. Back then, they were just small hiding spots to stay safe from bombs. But by the time the Americans arrived, the people there had been digging for 20 years. They had one big advantage: the dirt. The soil in Cu Chi is a special kind of red clay. When it's wet, you can mold it, but when it dries out, it becomes hard as a rock. It's almost like natural concrete. It doesn't cave in easily, it doesn't wash away in the rain, and it can even handle the shock waves from big explosions. The people digging these tunnels knew exactly what they were doing. They used the simplest tools you can imagine, just small hand hoes and wicker baskets. They did almost all the work at night, so the planes overhead wouldn't see them. They'd dig out the dirt, put it in baskets, and then carry it miles away to dump it into rivers or spread it thinly on farm fields. They were so careful that if you walked right over an entrance, you'd never know. They covered the tiny trap doors with leaves, grass, or even fake termite mounds. Some entrances were even hidden underwater in ponds. You'd have to dive down and swim through a pipe to get inside. And the holes were tiny, only 60 centimeters wide. They were made specifically for the smaller frames of the Vietnamese soldiers. If a big American soldier tried to squeeze in, he'd get stuck instantly. By the early 60s, the Viet Cong realized they couldn't win a normal war against the Americans. The Americans had too many planes, too many bombs, and too much firepower.
Fighting them on the surface was basically a death sentence. So they decided to move the entire war underground. They started expanding the tunnels like crazy. They didn't just make them longer, they made them deeper. They built the system in 3 different levels. The first level was about 3 meters down. This was for quick movement and getting in and out fast. The second level was 6 meters down, which kept them safe even if the surface was being hit by heavy artillery. But the third level was the real engineering marvel. It was 9 meters underground. At that depth, you could drop the biggest bombs in the world on top of it, and the people at the bottom would barely feel the floor shake. The levels were connected by vertical shafts that had trapdoors between them. This was a genius safety feature. If the Americans found a hole and tried to pump water or gas into the top level, the people would just drop down to the second or third level and seal the door behind them. The system had an answer to every attack. But you have to realize, these weren't just dusty crawl spaces. They were full-blown cities. They had hospitals with operating tables where doctors performed surgery by candlelight. They had kitchens with a very special ventilation system. They'd run the smoke through long horizontal pipes that came out of the ground hundreds of feet away from the kitchen. By the time the smoke reached the surface, it looked like morning mist. No pilot could ever spot it. They even had factories down there where they'd take unexploded American bombs, cut them open, and reuse the gunpowder to make their own weapons. There were wells for fresh water, big rooms for sleeping, and even spaces for theater performances to keep people's spirits up. At one point, 10,000 people were living underground at the same time. People were born there, they got married there, and they lived their whole lives just a few feet beneath the boots of the American soldiers.
The U.S. military tried everything to stop them. They started with the most obvious thing: bombing. In 1965, they launched huge operations where B-52 bombers dropped thousands of tons of explosives. They turned the jungle into a moonscape. Everything on top was gone: the trees, the grass, the houses. The Americans thought they'd won, but 9 meters down, the Viet Cong were just waiting. Once the planes left, they'd come right back up. They even used the giant bomb craters to collect rainwater or as new hidden positions. It was a total failure. Next, they tried chemicals like Agent Orange. They sprayed the whole area to kill the leaves so the enemy would have nowhere to hide. The forest died, but the tunnels didn't. The Viet Cong just stayed inside while the planes flew over, and then they'd come out into a dead landscape that was actually easier to walk through because there were no bushes in the way. Then came the water. Engineers tried to pump thousands of gallons into the holes to drown everyone inside. But because of those watertight trapdoors I mentioned earlier, the water only filled up a tiny part of the network. They also tried gas, but the tunnels were so long and had so many twists and turns that the gas would just get stuck or thin out before it reached anyone. They even tried using trained dogs like German shepherds to sniff out the holes. But the Viet Cong were one step ahead again. They started using American soap and red pepper around the entrances. The soap made the dogs think a friendly person was there, and the red pepper would mess up their noses for hours. Eventually, the dog program was just given up. When nothing else worked, the Americans realized they had to do the one thing no one wanted to do. They had to send people down there. They looked for the smallest, bravest guys they could find, usually guys who were thin with narrow shoulders. These men became known as tunnel rats. Being a tunnel rat was probably the scariest job in the whole war. You'd go down into a dark, tiny hole with nothing but a flashlight and a pistol. You couldn't take your rifle because it was too long to turn around. You couldn't wear a helmet because it would get caught on the ceiling. It was just you, a handgun, and your own heartbeat. The rules for these guys were simple but terrifying. First, you move as slow as possible.
Every inch of that floor could have a trap. Second, you use your light as little as you can. If you can see, the enemy can see you too. You had to learn to feel the walls and listen for the sound of someone else's breathing in the dark. And the traps were everywhere. They'd use punji sticks, which were sharpened bamboo stakes rubbed with nasty stuff to cause infections. They'd hide them in pits that looked like solid ground. They'd also use animals. They'd take venomous snakes, put them in clay pots, and rig them to the ceiling. If a tunnel rat tripped a wire, the pot would break and a snake would land on his neck in the dark. They even used scorpions and fire ants. But the biggest danger were the people. The Viet Cong knew every turn of those tunnels. They could move in total silence. Tunnel rats would tell stories about sitting in the dark, hearing nothing, and suddenly feeling the air move as someone walked right past them. Most of the fights happened from only a few feet away. It was pure, raw terror. The psychological toll was huge. These guys would come back up, but they were never the same. They'd have nightmares about the walls closing in or someone breathing right behind their ear. Even with all the money and all the technology, the U.S. couldn't win this battle. By the time the war ended in 1975, the tunnels were still there. The most advanced army in the world had been held back by people with shovels and red pepper. It really shows that in a war, the most powerful weapon isn't always the newest gadget. It's the will to keep fighting when everything on the surface has been destroyed. The Cu Chi tunnels are still there today, a massive 250-kilometer reminder of what happened. It's a story of survival that's hard to even wrap your head around. If you found this look into history interesting, please do me a huge favor and hit that like button. It really helps the channel get these stories out to more people. And if you want to see more deep dives like this into the parts of history that usually get left out of the books, make sure to subscribe to the channel. This is Ethereal Bygoner, and I really appreciate you hanging out with me today. See you in the next one.